It's time?
It's time. It's time. It's time.
It's time.
Is it time?
Hello, my fellow conformists, and welcome to another episode of Rock and Roll Revival. I am Christopher Nelson.
And I'm Aaliyah Sky.
And today we're going to be dissecting the debut album of Dead Sara. Now, this album came out around spring of 2012.
The end of the world.
Yes, the year of the end of our world, minus maybe about 8 months, 3 days before my birthday, actually. Dead Sara is a band. They're this sort of experimental grunge-style fusion, progressive, hard rock, blues, everything.
I mean, even gospel, and if you listen to some of the songs on the album.
Some of those songs definitely have that influence them. They have this diverse collection that comes with them. It's almost like a new genre of rock that we're experiencing.
I guess the best way to explain it, especially the music, because we compared it to kind of grunge. Well, I mostly compared it to grunge, is that it reminds me a lot of Nirvana, except, as you said, Dead Sara, you think, has a little bit more talent than Nirvana.
There's a lot more versatility. I think the songwriting is better. They have good leads. Nirvana didn't have very good leads. Kurt Cobain was not a very good lead guitar player. This album has a higher quality sense of musicianship to it.
Yeah.
It's similar to Black Sabbath in the way that there's not one member of the band that outperforms another member. They all have a very balanced level amongst talent amongst the four of them. So it's these two childhood friends, these two girls, Emily Armstrong and Siouxsie Medley. You know, the story is that they met when they were around 16 or so. They decided to form a band together. They created their own little independent record label, Pocket Kids, after acquiring a bass player and a drummer to fill out the lineup. Did their first EP, The Airport Sessions, which is pretty good. A little bit too poppy in my opinion, but still a pretty good EP. They were able to get a short-lived deal for Epic Records, I believe it was, Epic Legacy. They did some opening tours for some major acts. They played with The Offspring. They did an opening tour for Muse. And I didn't actually get to see those shows, but you and I, Aaliyah, we had our own chance to see them. I saw them twice at the DNA Lounge, and you were seeing them at the chapel, correct?
Yes, last year, and that was amazing. Chris, you already showed me Dead Sara before, and I really did dig them. And then just seeing them live was just amazing, how they capture that energy. They're very energetic. After the concert we got to meet Siouxsie, and she was very nice, very kind. We got to talk for about 10 minutes, talk about music and stuff, and it was really just an amazing experience. These girls are very nice, and you met Emily Armstrong too, didn't you?
Yes, because the show you and I saw together ourselves at the chapel, that was a tampon charity drive show. I saw them on the Pleasure to Meet You tour, what they played at the DNA Lounge. I did not get to meet Siouxsie the first time. The first time I met Emily. And this is one of the interesting things about Dead Sara is that they've done 2 albums with their independent label that they created, like it was their own label. And they had a falling through with the Legacy album. That's why they've been doing the smaller venues like the Chapel and DNA Lounge, and playing shows at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. Because they used to have this major label association that they dropped because for whatever reason they just couldn't get along. And the weird thing is that when I met them during the Pleasure to Meet You tour in around 2015, Emily told me that they had signed a major label deal again, this time with Atlantic Records. And there's only been one update that they're working on a new EP, but nothing else has come through that. So I'm wondering exactly what's going on, but one thing I have learned about Dead Sara, they're perfectionists with their music. You could tell just by how complicated some of these songs can get, that these are songs that they pick apart relentlessly. They don't just get in the studio and just jam it out, and they can't crank out songs in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and Dead Sara is kind of that band where they're not underground, but they're not mainstream. There's not that many people who know about them, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who know about them. So they're just kind of that in-betweeners right now.
It's curious to see what'll happen once they actually do release, if they actually release their material off Atlantic in the future. I'm curious about the state of their independent label, Pocket Kids, and I'm also curious on not only the musical direction that they pursue, but their actual vision of a band. Will we still be able to see them in small venues? This is purely speculation, but I suspect that they would probably go on tour with the Foo Fighters in the future, because Foo Fighters and Dead Sara have already made public appearances with each other.
I was about to say that, mention that, Dave Grohl said something about how Dead Sara is like the next big thing in rock music.
He said in one interview that they should be the next biggest band in the world. I don't necessarily want to see them get into that untouchable stage of being the next Zeppelin, but they have the talent to deserve it, and they deserve a lot more recognition than what they're getting.
Yeah. So we're gonna jump right into their self-titled album.
No more dilly-dallying.
Yeah, so we went through the history, their live, actually meeting them. So we're going to now talk about the album. So, Chris, would you like to start us off?
Well, we're not gonna try and spend too much time breaking each track individually, but the whole album front to back has a lot of good numbers on it. It'd be a shame to skip any of these things. The opening track, Whispers and Ashes, has a much more softer tone to it, a slower. It's got a flow to it that comes uniquely with a very distinct, thick, but also muffled this bass intro, which sounds like it's replicated on a guitar. It has a little bit of a fatness to it.
Yeah, because when I first heard it, I actually mistaken it for guitar, and then you said, no, it's bass, and then the more I listened to it, the more I'm like, oh yeah, that is bass.
It's a slower song, but it's not too slow. The tempo is a very good happy medium, and that's one of the things that it makes this song work. If it would be too fast, it would sound a little contrived, and if it was too slow, it would be a little boring with the actual very spacey sound that they put in this particular song. It's much more open-ended. It doesn't have the heaviness that the rest of the album carries. So actually, in my opinion, I actually really love this song, Whispers and Ashes. I love this very slow, soulful, softer, kind of darker sound, but not darker like a heavier sound, darker more like, I guess you could say emotionally darker. It has a bit of it has a very strong indie feel with this particular song. It is the sensation as if you are somewhere like lost in the dark and that you're traveling through these sort of woods. And I think, like you're traveling through these burning embers or something. It has that sort of, not necessarily chilling vibe, but not far from it. Not necessarily sinister either. But the only bad thing about this song is that it's the first song on the album, and usually the opening track of an album is supposed to set the tone for the rest of the album. It's supposed to leave you with a first impression. This album is a great album, and this song is a great song, but this particular opening track doesn't really open the gate to this album. It's not a good representation of the rest of the songs on the album.
Yeah. Personally, when I think of intro track, I think of they're supposed to be like the energetic, because this is the first time we're hearing this album, so it sets the mood. And here's something that's going to get redundant about the album, is that Emily's vocals set the mood, and in each song her vocals just amaze me. They can go from raspy to like just this pure clean sound, and this intro track is a perfect example of what she can do as a singer.
This is a good it's a bit softer, but it can get really heavy really quickly, and it has some versatility to it, but it is still one of the softer songs on the album, and maybe one of the little slower ones. But still, it's a really good, solid number. But I would just wonder if they rearrange the track listing, if the song might come off a little differently. It's probably the most different of the rest of the album, which is much more heavier. Most of the album is a little bit more experimental, a little bit more progressive. Not to disparage on this awesome song, but it just doesn't gel with the rest of them the same way. But not a bad thing at all. It just makes me wonder. It's kind of like a Quentin Tarantino movie. If you rearranged all the scenes in the order that they took place instead of the whole, beginning, end, middle story arc that Tarantino usually does, is it still as good? Now, of course, this is an album with a bunch of collection of numbers, and I don't know if that's the same thing to compare, but we only have so much time in our lives, so we need to get on to the next song, which unfortunately might be the worst of the album.
The Febreze commercial song, as we call it.
We Are What You Say is a little more closer to the style of the album, but is honestly a bit of an underwhelming song. It's a little bit forgettable. The melody is just a little... The thing is that it's more of a generic pop rock sound. It reminds me a little bit of Paramore a little.
It's probably something you would hear off of their first EP, the Sessions album. That's kind of the song you would think it would be on, and not something like this.
The sound is a little delicate while trying to sound heavy, but it doesn't really catch that at all. It really just sounds like it has a Disney Channel vibe a little bit to it, which is ironic because the rest of the album, starting with the very next song and the first single, this is where we're going to get in depth, has the exact opposite tone. The first single of the song, and what's usually their finale, they close, this is their live concert stable. The third track is Weatherman.
And this is a song most people know about. I mean, I even remember a Dollskin doing a cover of this song. That's how big it is, and this is kind of what started to push them into more of the mainstream, and what got people to listen to them a lot more was this single.
This was the first actual song written for the... Weatherman was the first song written by the existing lineup that appeared on all of their records. It's like a discovery sound. Like, this is the song where they knew what type of band that they wanted to sound like. It has a very similar tempo and a consistent hook with this bass line, this deep type of bass line that carries you throughout the whole song, but It is a great example of the roller coaster that Emily's vocals will take you on. She can go from a quiet, soft, soothing singing to a scream that causes your ears to bleed, but they bleed so good. And the way she almost has this, there are a lot of choruses in the song where she transitions, where she has this almost in pain sound with her moaning, and the energy just carries over to you so well.
And like I said, that's going to be something very redundant we're going to be talking about, because I can't think of a song where her vocals are bad or terrible. They're always so good. They're always, what draws me into Dead Sara is her vocals.
Every song has a versatility in their vocals too. Every song, it goes from high to low to clean to raspy to soft to piercing, which is one of the actual stronger hooks of this band, that there's no box to put Dead Sara into. I mean, with the first 3 songs on the album all sound way different than each other.
Yeah, and it's just like most bands nowadays, their singer always sounds the same, and with Dead Sara, it is something completely different, how her voice can change from one song to another, and that's really a good analogy, it is a roller coaster.
The whole album has this, and you'll notice with the next 2 songs, the album itself doesn't have one solid sound. It has a hook that combines it, which I think is really topped off and tied together by her experimental vocal range, but each song has a different sound to it. Some songs sound close to the other, but in terms of songwriting, in the terms of the toning of the guitars and the melodies and the tempo of the songs, there's no single consistency in the album. It's a great collection. It's like, we're not going to write an album, we're just going to write 12 great songs. Well, actually, there's 11 songs on this album, not 12, but the point is still there. It's not like they wanted to sit down and write a studio album. They were just going to take 11 great ideas and put them on a song. And this was an album, I felt like that they hand-picked, like they had a collection of songs that they've written over time based on their EP and their follow-up album. It sounds like they hand-picked these songs in particular to go on their debut LP for the highest quality impression. When they go into the next song, which is Dear Love, that's where the contrast that this band can achieve hits you for. You have songs that are extremely slow and they're very simple, quiet, toned down, even with their own versatility. Face to Face and Dear Love are songs that they have a much more soothing tempo to them, a little bit of a somberness to them, a sadness that it carries with them.
It seems like when they were recording this album in a studio, it seems more like it was just a jam session, and it was a jam session first, and then, they like, oh, I kind of like this, let's keep that in and stuff. Which is really cool how they, it seems like how they write music and how the album sounds, because that's a problem I know you have a lot of, kind of issue with, is when artists record kind of separately instead of all together. I feel like Dead Sara is one of those bands that they do it all together, almost like a jam session.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I'm worried about with their upcoming success, is that when it comes to the day, will they actually start working together separately? Will Dead Sara, this is their appetite for destruction? Are we on the verge of watching their Use Your Illusions coming up? The contrast really comes to because songs alternate in tempo. Because it goes Dear Love at track 4, a very slow love song, followed by Monumental Holiday, this heavy, quickly paced, punk-style screaming vocals and a tempo that just never slows down for anything. It's a quick 2-minute, just fast-paced rock song. It's a little simpler than a lot of the other songs on here, but it's got a lot of that feedback style, that classic Nirvana-ish sound. In fact, Monumental Holiday is probably the closest to Nirvana that this album comes to, in the best way possible. It's better than most of their songs.
Besides, they actually did do a cover of Heart-Shaped Box.
This is true, that they did do that cover. After Monumental Holiday, you go from a sort of grunge-style, quick headbang and pit song, and then you get to a very more experimental song with I Said You Were Lucky. This is where the experimentation of Dead Sara comes into play, where you get to see just how versatile they can actually be, and just how unusual some of their songs can kind of get. The song's got a much slower tempo, but it has a heavy use of pedals and synthesizers and various other loop tracks and reverb and all this other crazy techno stuff. A lot of technical aspects that I can't even name because I play drums. I don't touch guitar, but that's not the point. It shows a more modern experimental side without really losing the soul. You're not going behind a computer and making the melody. You're using the computers you brought in, your pedals and your synthesizers you brought up with your instruments, and creating a new experimental type of sound. It's like a little bit of not as much it's got a little slight fusion taste with a bit of that modern experimental Rush sound to it. The melody isn't necessarily clear and straightforward, but it's not supposed to be. Almost like a hard rock Pink Floyd hybrid.
Well, yeah, it's like if you took Rush and Pink Floyd, and then that would be them, almost, like the song, the influence-wise.
With a sprinkle of 90s. Huh, all those things make money! And then, the next song is Face to Face, which is similar to Dear Love, although in my opinion it's far more soulful. I like her more experimental in vocals, and there's a segment towards the end of the song where the scream that she throws into this song is just it's like you can hear her in pain as she sings this one part. That one 10-second bit of a very slow love song, or maybe it's more like a love tragedy song based on the lyrics, that 20-second scream is all that song really needs.
Yeah.
It is a little too slow, similar to Dear Love sometimes, but those vocals carry that song just like it carries the rest of the album, but more so in Face to Face than any of the other tracks.
This is a slow song done right, in my opinion. And you're right with that scream. I'm huge into vocalists, especially Emily. That's what really drew me into Dead Sara. And I apologize for being redundant, but her vocals just, I can't get enough of. And once you listen to Dead Sara, you'll understand what I'm talking about with her vocals and the emotion she brings to them, and how just her vocals just go from like that raspy, unclean kind of grunge to that like pure, clean kind of gospel almost. And and how many genres her voice seems to fit. It kind of seems to fit that grunge, like that Nirvana, and then that gospel, almost like Janis Joplin, and it just keeps going with her vocals.
You can feel the emotion so well in the song because of how she sings. You could hear the pain from her heart almost.
I'm really curious about asking her, if I ever meet Emily, what is her influences on her vocals? What does she listen to as she sings? What does she like to sing to? Because it seems like she has, if you ever talk to her, it seems like she listens to a lot of different kind of music, and that she takes in when she does her own band.
Which she has always addressed her main sources as a cross between the soft female, almost folkish rock of the 70s with bands like Heart and Fleetwood Mac. Actually, Dead Sara, the name Dead Sara comes from a Fleetwood Mac song, Sad Sara, but because of the way Mac sings it sounds like Dead Sara, that's how they got the name Dead Sara. So, and also, she said she's had a large influence in the anger of the 90s, in particular with Nirvana, and even Rage Against the Machine was reportedly a big influence.
And I can see that a lot. Especially since, we're not comparing them to Nirvana that much. It seems like it's kind of a reminder, and then they're just two bands you kind of want to talk about.
There is one
together.
thing she has in a close relation with Kurt Cobain, is that, God, she has a fantastic scream. Mm-hmm. Kurt Cobain was not as talented as a songwriter or guitar player as Emily or Siouxsie, in my opinion. But just like Kurt, Emily has this raspiness to her. It almost makes you jump. But moving on to the next track, we got ourselves a much more standard kind of prog rock style sound with that loose grunge to it. It reminds me a little bit of that sort of mild hard rock progressiveness, kind of something you would get out of the later 80s with bands like Guns N' Roses. That sort of that you get from a more modern punk sound, a little bit of a looseness to it, but a little more standard for the standards of the album, I guess you could say. Man, going on, you redundancy with these words.
It's almost like the Rocket Queen, of Appetite Destruction. That kind of what it reminds me of. They have the catchy riffs in it, and then again going back to Emily's vocals, those are really good. It's a really, we're not saying it's a generic song, but it's still a really good song.
It's a more basically written song, and of course there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We're not trying to basic doesn't necessarily mean negative. It's just less experimental than some of the other tracks. But if every track was way out there, the album would get a little too unappealing.
Yeah, it would just be too much to take in almost.
But it's the next one. The last 3 songs on this album are, in my opinion, the best 3 on the whole album.
And I would actually agree with you on that too.
The next one is one that's very unique. It has a much more collection of various other classic music genres thrown into this rock and roll hybrid, timed blues.
This is the one that actually, when I finally listened to the whole album before, doing this review and stuff, I listened to the album a couple times. This one always stuck with me. I've always been a type of person who does like country, and this song is very heavy. I can tell the country influences of this song, and that's what makes it so appealing to myself. And it's a really good song and shows how diverse Dead Sara can be. I mean, like I said earlier, they're gospel, then we said grunge, hard rock, and now you throw country in there. It's just like, what genre are they gonna do next?
Yeah, it has that old southern grassy vibe to it, while at the same time being really heavy. And it's also a little more out there too. It's closer to the more experimental side of Dead Sara, especially when you see the song performed live. It's the combination between a standard plucking style, old-fashioned country riff combined with this experimental grunge, just toughness that's thrown into there. This really heavy, deep sound, and the drums really show their boom on this one with a little bit of a slight time change towards the second third, like 2/3 into the song. It gets a little bit more. The time signature doesn't really necessarily change, but they play with a different style to it. They sort of like change it up with these time changes.
A common thing I noticed with Dead Sara is their songs are kind of in that between of they're simple but at the same time complex. They're kind of in that middle, and that's what I like about a lot. That's a good kind of in between.
They're not overly progressive so that no one could play them, but they're so new and far out there that there's no real term for it. The type of rock, and Time Blues is a perfect example of that. The type of sound that Dead Sara has, we need a new name for this type of rock, because it's not like any other form. It's this whole new, it's an accumulation of all the other types of rock.
Yeah, it's kind of like similar to like Tool or Primus, like how it's kind of hard.
I wouldn't even say it's similar to Tool and Primus, because Tool, you can kind of pinpoint what genre it's supposed to be. It's like a mathematical metal, which is its own genre.
Yeah.
It's got a bit more of a progressive metal to it, and Primus is just...
Primus.
Yeah, I don't even know what you would call Primus. But this is a little different, because this is still a clear rock, but it's a form of rock and roll that we just haven't seen yet. Now, at least not on this well done of a scale. It doesn't have I guess the closest thing, it has an indie influence to it. That might be the closest thing to it, but calling it that is just putting it in too much of a box. It's a huge misnomer. It's so heavy, and yet so soft, and yet so clean, and yet so rough, and yet so straightforward, and yet so experimental, and so bluesy, and yet so new wave, and tribal, and loose, and tight. It's like, oh my god, I can't even describe it.
And that's actually a good thing that we can't put in a box, because that means it's just that it's an album we always think about now. It's always an album you will have and you will think about. It's like, what is this? Like, you can clearly say it's rock, but then all the other influences in this album, it's just like, what is it? Like what subgenre of rock or whatever genre you want to like say. I know it's rock, but it's just kind of hard to pinpoint sometimes.
Well, the whole album is kind of hard to pinpoint, which is one of its bigger strengths. The last two songs, the next one is Lemon Set, which is a bit more of a tribal style sound, a little bit more chuk 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 chuk, got a straightforwardness to it. It doesn't have the experimentation, but the vocals got a unique twist onto it as Emily takes her guitar and winds it up. She doesn't use a vocal tube, but she uses his guitar kind of as a vocal tube, adding this new layer of depth with the song to it. It's actually a very straightforward song. It's not very complex musically. It's not very complex structurally, but it's the prime example of straightforwardness. It flows and it grooves, and it doesn't need anything too far out there, but it has just enough experimentations in there to keep it from fading out.
Yeah, because something we kind of didn't really talk about this album were the lyrics. We're really talking about the music side, but I think this song is a prime example of how good songwriters Dead Sara are. The lyrics to the song are just amazing to listen to, and just if you have look up the lyric sheet and just read what they're talking about in the story. They almost create a story with a lot of their songs.
And the thing about Dead Sara is that there are some bands where the lyrics put a new level of meaning to it, but the thing about Dead Sara is that the songs are just so well done that you wouldn't even need to know the lyrics. It's like if you never knew the words to any Dead Sara song, it would be a little upset especially from the point of view of an artist, to the message that they wanted to get across. But as a listener, it wouldn't compromise the quality of your experience. because the songs are just so well done for... It's the type of rock... It's one of those albums that rock and roll has needed for a while. But there's a bit of a contradiction here because this is an album that needs more attention. But if it gets too much more attention, the soul that Dead Sara has might fade away in the future. So there's a little bit of a paradox with that. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
And then now time for the very last song, Sorry for It All, which was actually previously released on the Sessions album, but they brought back for this album.
Except on the Airport Sessions version, it was entirely acoustic. And it was, I believe it was Just Emily, or Just Emily and Siouxsie. In this version, they made it a rock song, which I actually prefer the rock version better. And it's a little more, again, it's a little more standard of a rock song. There's not too many, there's not a lot of experimentations, there's not a lot of unique twists to it, but it's a very soulful song, and it's a very emotional, weightful song, and it's a perfect closer for this album.
It is.
It's the song is so straightforward yet so soulful that there's really nothing to even review about it. It's got a really great opening riff that has enough... The hook of the riff is that it changes just enough in a direction you wouldn't expect, but not in a way that you wouldn't foresee, just with that standard opening solo riff, with that standard finger playing. There's nothing extremely special about Sorry for It All, but that's what's special about it. But that's the greatest non-answer for any review that anyone's ever said.
Yeah, sometimes with songs, it's hard to talk about because it's hard to get the words out. It's just, you kind of have to play the song for someone, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I get it, why you like it. It's kind of hard to talk about and discuss and explain. This
album accumulates to a very epic clusterfuck of emotions. It has the transition from song to song goes from high to low so rapidly. It's an emotional roller coaster that you all the way from the front to the back. Like, there's not one weak song on here with the exception of We Are What You Say maybe, but even then that's not even one of the worst songs that had come out in a long time, not even close. There is a sort of spirit.
Yeah, this album is something that honestly will stick with you if you do listen to it, and that's what I like about it. You know, I feel like in recent times there's not a lot of albums that stick with people. It is going to go into that generic rock sound where all the songs sound the same, and a lot of the songs do feel like kind of filler songs. But with Dead Sara, you really can't, especially this album, it's hard to find a filler song, except maybe the second track in is the only one I can think is similar to a filler song, but even that's kind of not even the right way to explain it. It's really not a filler song, but at the same time, it is.
And it's great to know that they did it so well as a front-to-back album. Sorry for It All is a perfect accumulation of the soulfulness and yet the sadness and yet the energy that it carries at the same time. Sorry for It All accumulates all the emotions that every other song had already put forth and puts them into an easy, condensed, just perfect closer. It ends on an emotionally high but also sad note. It's melodically heavy and intense as it closes you off, leaving you with an almost... you have to catch your breath almost.
Yeah.
Especially with the way Sorry for It All closes itself. But to say the least, from front to back, this album is epic, and it's great to know that the band did so well from front to back as a whole album. They didn't just have good songs on the album, but the whole album has it's a theme to it. A lot of albums nowadays are more released with the notion of you put out 12 tracks or so, or 15, and you get 8 or 10 good ones. And the rest are more like they're just there. Not as much nowadays with the way that the music industry has progressed, are full albums being released that are really showing the potential of the band. But Dead Sara's debut album is one of the ones that does it right. It's good to know that we're getting straight, full-sized LPs, front to back, that can carry you from the whole story. Not a lot of them can do that anymore, and I'm just really happy to see that this has come through. Now, the only thing left now is Emily, Siouxsie, Chris, get off your asses and release the EP already. I mean, it's only been 3 years since your previous album. You have a tendency to wait a long time.
Please don't be like Tool, please. We're still waiting for the friggin' Tool album still.
Don't over-contrive yourselves. Oh, and while we're at it, come back to the Bay Area again. You do, every now and then, you do a rare secret show in Los Angeles. And you did the charity drive in San Francisco. But even you guys yourselves said that you need to come to San Francisco more often. So come to the Bay Area. You got an undying allegiance here.
Okay, so I guess we talked about this album in depth as much as we can. It is still a good album. It really is. I recommend it very highly that you go listen to it. I recommend this album to all my friends, all my family. It's a really good album.
Well, our closing thoughts is simply just pick up this album. You're really going to want to give this band a shot. And I think that's the most that we could say about this record at this time.
But we are not finished yet. So, as you know, we're still working with Die Laughing Records. So, we do have some shows coming up around the Bay Area if you guys want to come.
That's right. We're going to be ending this episode with some news of some live events that we're going to be showing to everyone.
So, the first one is Die Laughing Records and Leon Studios is presenting a benefit show. It's going to be on Saturday, March 3rd. It's going to be featuring a lot of bands, Screaming Bloody Marys, Verbal Abuse, Dick and Jane, Bite, The Next. And it's just going to be an awesome show. It's going to be all ages. It's from noon to 7 p.m. at Leon Studios, which is in San Francisco.
271 Doris Street.
And then the next one coming up is Can You Show You're Punk Enough? And these are a list of Dick and Jane shows coming up. Previously mentioned the one on March 3rd for the benefit. And then there's another one on March 8th at Bottom of the Hill, and it's for punk rock karaoke. And then the next two are April 7th and May 11th, both at the Winters. And then finally, Fang is going on tour in 2018. There are so many dates, but the big one is in February 25th, Oakland, California at the Gold Bull. And then there's another one at San Jose at the Ritz.
Although the Ritz is a 21 and over venue. And then the last show in the Bay Area is at Albany in the Ivy Room on March 23rd.
And then there's April 14th, Saturday at San Francisco at the Slims, which is a Die Laughing show with Screaming Bloody Marys featuring Sammy Town.
And those are all the major underground shows we got for you right now. Anyways, for our next episode of Rock and Roll Revival, we'll be talking to 329 Flacco from Triggered Heart. Yes, they use aliases in this band. And we'll also be discussing some of their original material. They have not released a full EP, but they have a number of tracks that they've released, and we're going to be discussing those too. Anyways, I'm Christopher Nelson.
And I'm Malia Sky.
And we'll see you next time on Rock and Roll Revival.
Have a good day.
This is Rock and Roll Radio. Stay tuned for more rock and roll.